Alrighty, welcome to week 7 in CIT 85 HTML and CSS. So in week 7, we continue, of course, our venture into learning CSS with Kevin. And what we're going to learn is some new things on top of what Kevin's going to cover in order for you to apply these new CSS concepts into your project. And specifically, viewport height will be one, linear gradients, and text shadows. Okay, so what I'm going to do is we're going to walk through an example in a second for actually pre-learning by building what's called a hero section and a component section. And you'll see how this is done. Now, the hero section is something that Kevin doesn't cover, but he does cover the component section as an example. He uses the callout box to add a background image to. So here's the thing that he's going to cover, which is how to apply background images into your HTML structure. Okay, so we're going to learn those. So I just want to show you, give you a little preview of what the project itself is going to end up. So here's the example for my page as far as that background image, okay? So this is considered a hero image. Now, a hero image is kind of like a large part of the page. You can often see this. You could make this 100%. This is its viewport size. Whatever the viewport of the page is, whatever you set that value to, 100 would be the whole page, 70 would be less. You get to determine how you want that to look. But, you know, we're very common to see these large hero images when we're looking at sites, okay? So that's the hero image example. And then if I scroll down, here is then that call out. I think this was my tip box that I used, but it's the same formatting that for the call out that we use. And then I use this texture here on that background, okay? So these are two things that aren't covered by Kevin, and you see me do this fairly often, where I say, let's cover them in attendance this week. So here's what we're gonna build together, okay? Just a quick look. We're gonna end up building this, which is, oh, I was just playing around with this, which is you're going to generate the two images. First, some of them, it's not, this is not an image you're going to use for your project. Just, I don't care what you use, come up with something. And then you'll create another one that we will use more for a box or a tip box or a call out box. Okay, so this is a hero image, this is a component image, and we're going to build these, okay, in this example. So here's what you want to do to get started, right? So you're going to go to your public repo. You're going to create a week 7 folder in your public, and then you'll end up doing 3 commits. But for this first part, I'm going to challenge you to do this on your own, okay? Which is, and I will show you after I hit pause, I will show you how I've done it. But this is stuff we've done before where you're creating an index file. You're using that emit command to do those boilerplate elements. You're creating a CSS file. You're linking the two together. You're going to generate 2 new assets. In this case, I've given you a sample file name here. The extension will be based on where you generate. It doesn't have to be this. It could be PNG. Matter of fact, I think mine ended up being that way. But this will be your cinematic photo, right? So choose your topic, go to your Gen AI tool and generate that. And then you'll create another one. This will be a texture new, okay? And this will be some kind of texture that you would want to use. Again, you saw the example I showed you in my project, okay? So first, once you have this done, you'll end up doing a commit, but right now I want you to try it, okay? So you'll want to have these 2 images in the week 7 folder, have this all set up and run your live server, and then I'm going to hit pause here to give, or I'm going to actually pause myself to actually just set this up on my side, but I suggest you pause and attempt this on your own. All right, so here's my output. Yours may look different. Your folders might look different. I definitely recommend using an images folder, right? So here we've created the week 7 folder, right? So this is nothing new. The key is, where do you create it? It needs to be underneath the other weeks that we've done, at the same level that we've done. Remember, you click out here and then you hit that to do that if you don't have it. You click in here then and create that new file, that index. Now here is that file. I added a H1. You will want to do that as well, and a H2. And you can do another if you've already done a commit. If you haven't, this will be included in that. So this would be week 785, and then a hero masterclass is in here. That's just a title, H1 inside of here. You'll see where we'll use that in a minute. Okay. Then you create your CSS file. Now notice I didn't create a subfolder for the CSS. If you did, totally fine, no problem. You just have to make sure you modify however you've linked it to make sure everything works. And I just have some content in here, honestly, just to have something to show up. You know, really, that's really what I wanted there as well. Okay, so then I started my live server. Oh, the other thing is I have just my public open as well. Okay, and then I start my live server, and then let's see, this is the beginning document as it is. Okay, so that's your first step here. Okay, so now do your commit. If you needed to make any changes, just do, you know, fixing anything that you missed there. Make sure your images folder is lowercase. That's an important thing. Make sure all your files are actually lowercase. Make sure you don't have any spaces in your file names. Notice I had a PNG, so like I told you, I just gave the example of the other one. And actually, these should have been, just to do this now, since I realize I didn't, is new, right? Remember how I had you do the dash and texture new, okay? So I'm going to rename those as well, because when you're doing file names, you really want to follow the standards here, okay? All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to build that hero image that I showed you before. Okay, we're going to use a minimum height of a viewport height. Okay, now we've used several of these around minimum height, and we've used them, but this is verticals and vertical spacing. We'll use it also for vertical spacing, and then we're also going to learn about a gradient, a linear gradient. Now what this is going to do is kind of give us a filter concept. So, you know, you can apply filters to images, but, you know, in this case, we're going to actually use some CSS to do it. Now, hopefully by now you've already gone out, generated your images, whatever AI tool you want to have. Now, one thing I would say here, and this is definitely something I would do and will do, is that these images, look how large they are. If you can't see the bottom, 9.74 megabyte, that's really too big. So ultimately, I will do this to play around with this example, but ultimately I would want to resize these. This is where you see me talking about a hero image might be 1800, but it wouldn't be 2800, okay, as far as the pixels across and then the pixels down, because it's just way too large, and that's something you definitely want to do. But for our purposes, we're just playing around. Okay, so now let's actually start building out the rest of this to give you that example. So now I'm going to move over to so you have your one commit done. So now let's work on this hero section by adding our first class. Okay, so we're going to use classes here because, you know, it's just the more you write CSS, the more you realize classes are really the most common thing we write. That way we can apply it to different areas if we need it. We've talked about with Kevin when to use selectors, right, and when to use IDs aren't used as much. So, but here's where we'll start. Now, the other thing I want to say here is that what we're about to do is very different than what we've done in the past with images. We've used Fig and Fig caption and then the image tag to put images on our page. This is very different. You still want to have those on your page, but in this case, these are background images you're using for a particular HTML, in this case, structure, okay? Or a division, right? A section or an element. So the first thing we would do is do min height, okay? And we're going to say, in this case, I'm going to say 70 VH, 70 viewport height, right? Viewport height says take up about 70% of the page. Now, we're not going to see any difference yet, but I'm just going to set that now. And so now what we're going to do is background image. This is what Kevin's going to go over with you as far as how to include a background image. Now I'm first going to do a URL. Now this is very different than how we reference images was when we were doing it, when we were including them on the page as an image tag, okay? This is a very different way because we also have to say, to tell it how to reference, how to find those images. And in this case, because we've put them in a folder, we need to say, hey, here's the syntax. And in this case, I'm going to do dot /. And what this means is from the current CSS location. Now this is key because if you end up putting your CSS in another folder, you would have had to have a different reference here. Okay, so just know that this is true. I'm going to do images, and then I can just point to, oh, hey, there's my hero image. Okay, so now with this, I at least have my class. So I'm going to come over here. I actually haven't even written my HTML yet, so let's actually do that. I'm actually just going to grab some just so you don't have to watch me write HTML. Okay, so in this case, we're going to use a section. Okay, so we're going to use a section, the hero, the class is the hero image, and H1 for lifting up. Okay, and you'll see how we'll handle this as far as placing it on that image. Okay, so now I can go to my live output here, and I can see that it's showing up. I can see my text here. But, it doesn't look great. It doesn't look like what I want. It doesn't, and this is really just understanding, and let's come over here if I right click, because you want to be in here to play around with, is this vertical height? I could say, okay, it shows you the percentage, but let's say I did 100, right? That would then take up more of my page. Now it's a little hard to see here because I'm looking at it in DevTools, right? So, but in this case, it's taking up all of the page itself of what's left of it based on what's on top of it. Okay, so that's the first thing we've added into the CSS, right, is this. But the thing we're going to do here now is actually we're going to use another background, but in this case, we're going to say size. And this is where we do cover, okay? And this tells it how to actually place that into here. Now notice immediately, as soon as I put cover, it actually takes that entire image, scales it down, and then builds it. Now this is, by the way, also where we're going to start talking about how just adding cover makes this responsive, okay? And then we can add other selectors in order to actually tell it how, when we get smaller viewports, right, the size changes, then how we want it to. And that's actually going to be one of the things we're going to do next. Hold on, I'm going to clear my throat. Okay, so now that we've done the background, let's actually do background position. Okay, so what we want to now say is when that changes, how do I want to kind of fix the position? And I could fix it X and Y, but I can also just say center and center it. And I'll show you in a minute what this does. Okay, so in this case, how does it change? When I do this, notice what it does is it keeps the center, because in this case, I want the lifter, the person, to be centered, kept centered, that no matter what the viewport is, right? So that's what center gives me. And this is where I definitely recommend, as we're going through these things, is going over and asking, going into your favorite app and doing, hey, what is viewport height? To give you an example of that, right? And then, position center, like what is this doing to me? This is, it is actually, first it centers on the x-axis, pushes it perfectly into the middle of the box, and then it centers it on the y-axis. So this is the equivalent of what you may have seen 50-50 that centers things. Now, if your image is different, right? If your image is different, you might want to play around with how you would do this. Maybe you would do top. So if I did top center, let's see what that does. Okay, so now what it's going to do is you don't see a lot of difference here, but it actually does. Notice how it gets bigger. It kind of stays so it's more, we'll look at the top here. So this is where, for my particular image, and you're going to want to change this for yours, I'm going to do center, but play around with what this means for yours, okay? All right, so let me scroll that down. Oh, did it refresh here? Center. Yeah, so actually you can kind of see where even center on some of the viewports might cut off part of the image, but this is also where we're going to end up making it look more like a background image itself, okay? Now, the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to do text align. I'm going to text align this right here, right? So lifting up, we're going to play with this in a minute. But first thing I'm going to do is just center it. Okay, now this is stuff we've done before. Okay, so the other thing I'm going to add into here is actually a linear gradient. So let's look at that before we actually add it, because this is one that when you first look at it can be very like, whew, that's a lot to take in all at once. Okay, so we're going to use a gradient, right? And you're going to actually, looks like it creates a overlay that fades from top to bottom. Okay, so we're going to end up giving it this RGBA, so red, green, blue, and then alpha is the transparency. But we give it a color we want, and then when we do 0, 0, 0, it means 0 red, 0 green, 0 blue of the cover. So we're doing a gradient over the image itself. Okay, so then you can see how these things, and for me, when I use Gemini, it gives me this nice little visual that I can play with the opacity, right? So once I tell it what RGB I want, then I can tell it on that last channel, in this case, this last one here, what opacity, how you see through it. So let's actually do this in our HTML. So in in our CSS. So we apply this, right, as in the background image as another attribute, and we say linear gradient. Okay, and then we're going to say RGBA. Now we're going to pick the color in a minute, and we're going to say 0, 0, 0. So now this is where you can pick your custom color that you want. Okay, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do on the last one, the opacity, I'm going to do 0.5, just to give us something to start with. Okay, now notice as soon as I do that, by the way, it's a syntax error right now because I don't have the whole thing written out. Okay, so I first do the first one, comma, and then I'm going to do another one. So RGBA, because remember, it's the way I'm doing it's top to bottom, so it has a gradient on both parts. RGBA, there it is. Okay, again, I'm going to do 0.0.0, and in this case, not dot, comma, 0, comma, 0, right, comma, and then I'm going to do 0.7. And again, this is where I want you to play around. I want you to play around with this because this is where you start to learn, and then I'm going to end that linear gradient. Okay, so that, and then I'm going to put a comma. Okay, so what this is doing, let me just make sure I've put everything in here that I needed. Oh, but by the way, I noticed what I accidentally did is I got rid of the URL. Okay, so let me make sure here. I can see that there is an issue here. Let me see where that's at. RGBA, comma, comma. And then it should wrap the whole thing into here. So this is where you start to go, okay, you know what? I must be missing something. Let me look. Hold on, let me look real quick. Oh, that was a little tricky one, right? So what I had to do is go back and look at it and realize actually here I didn't need another opening parentheses, okay? Because the linear gradient in this case is the top and the bottom gradient. So now, and let's just look at it the way I've coded it here, and then we can start playing with it. And this is where your dev tools can be really handy. So notice what it did here. It made it very dark, right? So if I right click and hit inspect, then I can go in here and I could go, oh, you know what? Maybe for that top one, I want to make it a little more matching, maybe that top part of the image, right? So maybe, okay, right? So actually, maybe, is it the bottom that you're doing first? Sorry, I just have to remember myself because I don't use these every day. To the right, top to the bottom. Okay, so that actually is top to the bottom. But this is where you can oh, actually I was playing with the bottom. No wonder I didn't understand why it was coming here. So I would probably leave this one a little darker here. And then the top one I would probably make more kind of matching that top. Again, this is where you kind of play and you just don't know. It's a little too much, so that I could change opacity here, right? And I could, oh, that's the opacity is 0.28. So this is where I might go now and put in these colors to say, here's the gradient I want to use. Okay, so just play around with adding this linear gradient, syntactically doing it as I've done here. Now this is its standard. I haven't updated it with what's in DevTools. That's part of what you'll do. Okay, so first play around here, play around with, now you also have this picker inside of here, right? And you also have the opacity inside of here. So these will change these colors by using it in here, but sometimes I just like to do it in DevTools so I can see what it looks like. Okay? All right, play with that. Now we're going to add one last thing here, okay? And this is going to be one thing we've been introduced to, but we're using padding dash block, okay? So on the padding block, because we've done padding, we're now going to use this now same vertical viewport, and we're going to say, hey, use 40, and then you'll see what this looks like, and then use 5 for vertical block. And now what does this do? What does this do is it takes my text, and by the way, this is based on the padding, right? So I could right click, hit here, and then I could look, oh, okay, that's what that is doing. If I hit right click here, actually it's in the whole image itself. That's why it's moving it that way. Okay, so let's come over here, right? So over here, you can see that that moved and added that blocking into there. So we're using padding dash blocking, and then this is where we could play with how we want this to end up. Okay, now that then gives us at least our section CSS. Okay, so now let's actually use something else called, but now we're going to use what's called a descendant. Now this is something you're also going to learn. We're going to say anytime you have a class of hero and you see an H2, and this would be only H2s that exist within that structure, then I want to make that color white. So the text, any text that's in there, make that white. Okay, so let's go look. So nice, right? So then based on the way this looks, this shows up better. And again, this doesn't, like if I had, let me just show you this. If I had another, because I actually converted this, let's say I had another H2 outside of here, this would be attendance, right? For learning about hero sections, okay? Something. Just, and the only reason I'm putting it here is to show you that this H2 that we're writing is a descendant. So it's saying only where you also already have, look at this attendance hero class, and any H2 that exists inside of there, only apply this CSS to it. Okay, so let's do font size, and I'm going to make this rather large because that's fairly common for hero images. Okay, and now we're also going to use something called, well, let's actually go look at this. Oh yeah, see, okay, I like this. And this is where I'd play around with and see how this looks at different viewport sizes. I put 10, so I might actually make it just a little bit smaller. I'd play around, okay? Let's say I play 8. Let's see what 8 looks like. Yeah, a little better right there, okay? So now we're going to add one more thing to this, and it's going to be text shadow. Now, why is that? Notice this, right? So as soon as we add text shadow, and this is where we say, okay, I want, and we'll go look at this in DevTools in a minute. And now we see this same RGBA, right, that we can apply to that. So now it may not show up very well on the recording, but here, right, if I come over here and I look at the text shadowing, I can turn it off, and I do see on my side where that is, you know, making that, giving it some dimension. Again, it probably won't come across, but this is what I just want you to play with in here, okay? So now, going back to attendance. So now we've built, right, the hero. So I want you, I'm going to pause here. I want you to play around with yours, you know, get it the way you want it, then do your commit here, and then I'm going to pause, but I also want you to pause and play with it as well. Okay, so for this last one, I went ahead and just created it so that I can go over it with you rather than to take all the time, because I also want you to do a similar thing here, but let's go over it. So first thing I did is I created an article after my section, right? By the way, doing good formatting is also really helpful. It's helpful when you format your document or you format your section to make it more readable. So what I did is after the section, I added an article. Okay, and then I added some content for how to get started, camp transformations where I go, and then I added a UL, so an unordered list, and then list items. So come up with some content that matches this, and use the class of attendance card, not attendance hero, but attendance card. Okay, so now let's actually go look at the CSS for this attendance card. So this is where you use a background image. Again, use your texture. Now in this case, I need to reference them in the hero section. I didn't notice, I just didn't do that. So I need to do that. Okay, and then texture new. Make sure I select the right one. This is where the editor's trying to help me. Okay, so textured new, that works. And then you come up with your own gradient that you want to use. Use cover, we've already been through that. Background position, now I use center bottom on this one. I used a max height, okay? And I used a margin. Now you don't have to use margin here, you can. You get to kind of style this how you want. You'll see what mine looks like, okay? And in this case, we used some padding and then border left. Now you'll see why this is a nice touch to add in a second. Now again, I use this same concept of a descendant selector. So I said any H2 within that attendance card, then make white and use a text shadow here. And then within the attendance, and I said any UL. Now this is also something Kevin's going to talk about, is how to style list, which is really fun, and add like emojis and other things. But for now, I just wanted mine orange. So whenever it saw the UL, it made them orange. Now, I would probably at this point add, definitely play around with it, but here's what my output ended up looking like was here, right? So play around with having this component as well, all right? So coming back here, so what I want you to do is, we didn't really introduce anything new on the second one, so I just walked through it, but create an article and then do a component, use the selector, that descendant selector, we also did that up here, and go through and create that image, okay? Okay, so what you're going to do is end up pushing this out. Oh, I'll give the URL, right? You could talk about what vibe you were going through here, right? Review somebody's, review theirs and give them some feedback, right? Look at their section, and does the image stay anchored on the focus point? Remember how we were talking about that background position, right? So play with this, have fun with this, because anytime you get to play with something before you actually have to learn it, it's always handy. And this is just kind of a fun way to get introduced to some concepts that you're going to get in both the project, but on the code-along and the project. So just to be clear about this, and I'll put this, you push this once you've done your 3 commits. Okay, you'll push this to GitHub, and then you'll have that week 7. I'll put, by the time you see this, that will be there. And then you post, right? Once you post it, and then you describe the vibe that you're going for, and then you reply. And I put 20 points for the reply here, right? So talk about in your, actually in the grading, right? You have the commits. Did you use the VH, the background position, the gradient, linear gradient? Using margins for centering or descendant selectors for contrast. So as long as you threw most of these in here, but more than anything, you created something that was relatively quick, but at least gave you that experience. All right, time to move on to the next item.